Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. You might be familiar with the Latin phrase mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body. The Roman satirist Juvenal wrote about this some 20 centuries ago. Interesting trivia bit, the sneaker company Asics is an acronym of this expression if you just substitute anima, spirit, for mens, mind. The quote speaks to the need for balance, a central theme in transgender lives. Until our spirit is aligned with our physicality, balance is precarious. When cultural expectations deny rather than embrace diversity, we are othered, which is to say we are put out of balance with the world we live in. In today's episode, I talk with Stefan Simanovich, founder of Transforward Healthcare in New Haven, Connecticut. Stefan has worked in mental health clinics with a focus on advocacy and trauma-informed therapy with trans and queer people. He is currently a clinical instructor of social work in the Yale Department of Psychology. Well, it's not an Irish name, is the problem.
It's a
despite the Irish
Serbia.
beard.
Well, actually, no. Irish is it's in my blood.
There you go. Yeah, you see, you can't hide
But
the Irish.
Serbia is Simanovich.
Well, Stefan Simanovich, welcome to Transqat. We are in New Haven at the offices of Transforward. Maybe we should start there. Tell me a little bit about Transforward.
Yes, so Transforward is kind of, it's my baby, so to speak. And I say that because I couldn't have imagined being where I am at today. And it's only about to be the 4-year anniversary. And really, it has evolved over time because initially I opened Transforward. I mean, being a trans person myself, I could really relate just as a therapist and as a provider with how limited healthcare is and ability to access it, especially gender-affirming care. So when I opened Transforward, really it was the mission of just being able to provide a space where people could just be their authentic selves at an affordable cost. So, being able to reach people from all over the map, despite income status, to be able to come somewhere and have high-quality, affordable, long-term trauma-informed healthcare.
Right.
Because especially, and this was 4 years ago, but throughout my transition, it was very hard and challenging to find sustainable healthcare that uplifted and honored myself and my identity. Really just to access medical transition and care too. And at the time, 4 years ago, I was getting, I was working part-time at Clifford Beer's clinic, part-time in my group practice, and then full-time at Clifford Beer's clinic, which is a clinic here in New Haven, doing therapy. But it was there was a very high demand. I mean, I was getting a lot of calls and referrals for people, trans people, and for people from trans experiences for healthcare. So I was like, I'm going to do this. It was kind of a leap. I did leave my job, and it was a risk, but I felt very called to it.
So your practice is exclusively trans people?
Well, it initially started that way. However, I did find it is more, I would say, cisgender people or people from all over really sexual and gender minorities. So it is about 96% trans-identified people at this point. It has evolved. The mission has evolved over time in doing more advocacy to remove gender dysphoria and things from the DSM-5, and also being able to reframe and relearn what gender means in a society, and also pushing for more language in healthcare that uplifts and honors trans people and trans experiences outside of gender dysphoria as a model, as a framework, and as language. And it has also evolved in being able to educate people more on gender and sexuality and how trauma impacts one's ability to be embodied in our authentic sexual and gender expressions. So there's really 3 tiers now to Transforward and the model and what it means beyond the clinical practice itself.
You've used the word trauma a couple of times. You had told me when we first were speaking that you use something called EMDR in your practice. Mm-hmm. And so I did a little research. I read Dr. Shapiro's book so that I would be a little bit better educated. So
amazing, yeah. So EMDR therapy has been gift to my practice. I got trained a few years ago, several years back. But yes, EMDR therapy is a very powerful tool and a strategy to use with folks in a clinical or therapeutic setting to really be able to quite literally let go, release energy. I mean, it is energy. I mean, when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about negative memories or experiences that quite literally physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually live in the body. I mean, we are walking biographies, you know. And so oftentimes when we are activated or we're going through issues related to distress, stress, heightened nervous systems, anxiety, depression, you name it, or mental emotional distress, typically in my framework, this is rooted in past experiences. Okay, so EMDR, what can happen is we open up space and we use using bilateral simulation as a tool.
And not to jump in on you
no,
there,
go
but
ahead.
that can be tapping alternately.
It can be tapping. It could be eye movement. So eye movement is the traditional model and way. So moving your eyes back and forth while we're bringing up a negative experience or perhaps a memory. And sometimes when we think about memory, and this is, I think, a misconception in society, we're still getting to know and also still incorporating this language into our current healthcare models. But a memory and the components of a memory can be an image, a sensation, an emotion. So oftentimes someone might not have a literal image of a memory. However, with EMDR, we can create symbolic images, or we can just activate that sense of abandonment, for example, that someone might feel from a past memory or past experiences, because oftentimes it's not just one-time single events. I mean, trauma is very complex, and it has its multitude of impact within someone's mental, emotional, spiritual well-being and sense of safety and security in the physical world. So what we can do is open up that space. It's almost, I mean, this is a great analogy. You probably read about it. You're on the train, we're riding on the train together. Mm-hmm. We stop, so I'll say go with that, bilateral. So we might do eye movement or tappers as we're bringing up a painful experience or memory. And then we're on the train, we stop, and I ask you to take a breath. You breathe in, let it go. And I ask to people, what are you noticing? And when I ask that, we're noticing it could be an emotion, it could be a feeling, it could be a sensation in the body, it could be another memory came up or something else came up. Well, wow, this other memory came up that I didn't recognize was connected to this. Or I don't know, I'm not getting anything, because sometimes what happens in this process, we'll get to know someone's defense system. So typically when I don't notice anything, we can be detached or disconnected from our body, and that is also a function of trauma. And that's also part of the process that with EMDR will bring up these belief patterns in this moment where we can create space for it in a safe way and be able to quite literally allow new energy to come in, new beliefs of myself or new perspective, or connecting with a relational resource. Sometimes I might ask people, especially if we're struggling, if there's a positive influence in my life, like my grandmother or my grandfather was really powerful actually for myself. Mm-hmm. This is real for my life. My grandfather was a powerful resource and figure for me. So in my own EMDR, let's say if I'm the client, as a therapist, maybe bring in, what would your grandfather say about that? Could we bring your grandfather in and just notice his energy?
Something that adds an element of comfort and
grounding, right. Love, perhaps, feeling that connection. Yeah. I might ask someone, can you just notice that warmth of your grandfather? Let's go with that. Because keep in mind with bilateral, we're not just focusing on the negative. We can also uplift and highlight the positive, energetically bring up those moments that have been powerful. For trans people, for example, and this is something I'll use in my own practice, do you remember, what was that moment like when you really took ownership of your life or yourself? That moment and for many, many folks, that is that moment of either conscious awareness of my identity or coming out and embracing a sense of self. Okay, go with that. Just notice that feeling of when you took. Is there an image that symbolically represents that moment when you came out, when you just felt that ownership or perhaps pride or connection with yourself? Yeah. What was that moment? Could you have an image that represents? Because remember, it doesn't have to be literal. It could be symbolic.
Well, that was one of the things in Shapiro's book, the idea of, okay, you've got this past experience, give it a texture, give it a sound, give it a color. so that you've got something that you're hanging on to, which, as you say, doesn't have to be the literal, but it's something that will trigger the neural connections, and you see where it goes.
Exactly. That's all I'm working with, the associations and power of memory, and really tapping into the complexity of who we are as human beings, but also someone's spirit. And this is something that I really talk about and you'll see with internal family systems, other model of therapeutic approaches when it comes to working with human beings, is that I call this part the core self. Many other people may call it the wise mind or the human spirit, essence, whatever you want to call it, life force. There's many names for it. But for me, I call it a core self, which I believe, and goes back to gender, that everyone has a core gender or an essence in which we embody our gender. And I believe trans experiences and trans people really highlight that, because despite upbringing and background, trans people exist. And even when it comes to gender, and going back to EMDR, what is so powerful is that it allows us to really hone in to the wisdom of the body, the wisdom of the body to heal, the wisdom of the body in accessing embodiment, or who I'm supposed to or meant to or feel like I am on this earth, despite how I've been treated or perceived. And by doing that, we can use imagery. For example, I call it a gender affirming self-image that I kind of use as a visualization for people to really, really tap into, okay, this is how I've been perceived and treated my entire life based on my physical body, or how I've been perceived in, let's say, a gender identity or another identity that I hold. And let's see what we can do to now access the spiritual, emotional depth of your soul, so to speak, your heart, where your heart is. So what I might do is guide people through a visualization, because with EMDR we can use visuals and imagery, because we actually, and I don't actually recall if she talks about this in the book or not, but we don't think in words, we think through imagery. And when we think a thought, when our thoughts are in images, and we're perceptual beings that take images and visuals that then are representations symbolic of our emotional, mental states and attitudes. So with gender, I might ask someone, and if you'd like, you can even notice yourself.
Sure.
For a gender affirming self-image, we might meditate into this. Sometimes it'll be interactive, because I really try to focus on everybody's different and unique, and everybody has their experience. So this is where it comes to individuality and working with someone. However, I might ask, what is a place or an activity that you love doing? Despite, it doesn't matter, your past, but it doesn't, just what feels true to you, something you love to do, a creative expression, activity. Do you have one?
I love to read.
You love to read.
Yeah.
Is there a place that you love to read? And this could be, by the way, a real literal place on this physical planet. It could be imaginary.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I have mental place that I go to that is, it's kind of a traditional library with the multiple stories up the walls of bookshelves with that sliding iron ladder, and I've got a comfortable chair, and the light is low. That's my place.
Great. And if you just notice, and typically I'll guide folks through a body scan first before we even get to this, just noticing your feet connected to the floor. You can kind of relax your jaw, let your tongue rest on the bottom of your mouth. And you can really start to take breaths into your gut and your chest space. So I invite people to just notice your breath. Start to become aware of that energy in your chest and your heart, relaxing your legs. And you can do a body scan. I tell people on their own, just relaxing each part of the body. And then as you start to relax and your breath gets more soft and gentle, go ahead and bring up that space that you just described, the space of joy for you. It can just be of comfort or joy or peace, something that you love to do. And you might just notice that space as you bring up this image, maybe the colors, sounds perhaps in this space that are inviting to you, maybe things you can see that bring you comfort. And then I invite people to just notice your physical body, notice your body in this space. What does it feel like? This is a space where you can just be authentically you. You can almost imagine there's no one else in this world. It's just you, almost as if you're in a globe or just a sphere. You can almost extract this image from everything else and just allow yourself to be there. What are you wearing? What colors feel true to you? As you continue just to take breaths into your heart and your gut. And just notice how your body is shifting as you just bring up this image, this authentic sense of self or expression. There's nothing to do, nothing to be. It's just you can just purely exist as you are. No expectations. Just there, just this present moment in time. And now just notice again your body. Perhaps a sense of warmth. And you can almost imagine breathing this image into your heart space, quite literally breathing that in. So it radiates from through down your whole body, from the top of your head down to your feet, down your arms, out the tips of your hands. And then this is a moment where if you just stay here, I might add bilateral stimulation. So you could tap yourself if you're there, just gently. We go slower too. We tap a little slower. When there's things that are positive or we want to really install an EMDR, we go a little slower with the bilateral. And then when we're there, I ask people, because this is where names and language is it's almost very critical when it comes to healing and health, is the language we use, because this impacts our mindset. So is there a word or a name or a phrase that you just want to put with this image? And oftentimes what I might do is ask people, and this goes back to the trans experience, just to consider your name. So for me, Stefan. And what I'll do is just attach this name, Stefan, to this image. Or if folks want to use something different, like I am, or love, or compassion, whatever it is to people.
The word safe.
Safe.
Is what, yeah.
What are you noticing in your body as you hold this image?
The shoulders, the jaw are relaxed in a way that I become aware of how much they're clenched a lot of the times in the other world. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of everything I need is here.
Mm-hmm. And if I ask you, where does this image of you, where does this sense of you live in your body? Where are you noticing this energy?
My head, as opposed to my heart. It's just
anywhere else?
Maybe my hands, because I'm holding a book.
I'm so interested too. You said your head as opposed to your heart. Say more.
When you were describing the energy moving through, I was picturing it starting there and moving out from a central place out to the extremities. And the image of where I am is up here rather than...
Yeah, wow, I love that connection though. You just made that kind of from chest up and out, like
yeah. So it's at the energy is at the center of me.
I love it. No, it's amazing. By the way, and how did you? Well, tell me how did you open your eyes?
I just opened my eyes.
Her eyes.
I did. Wow. Okay.
Well, can I just note that I love that you said, I love people's interpretations and how people make meaning of this. And by the way, this is just an example of a meditation I might use. There's so much we could use and toy with to make it individual. But, when I was getting started with this in my practice using EMDR, I started to notice themes and patterns of emotional, mental distress and energy in the body, so sensations. Positive and negative. So in doing this visualization with people, and I'm gonna say 100% of the time, I know it's in science and research, that's a stretch.
Right.
But I'm gonna go ahead and say it because it's very true, and how I've kind of really the craft of my frameworks and models have been centered on this exactly. And I love what you just said. It really symbolically represents this. Is that every time when I would ask people, where do you notice this authentic sense of you? Where do you notice this energy in your body as you just hold this? 100% of the time, people would say, when we get to the layers of it, because in the beginning, every single time people would say the energy in their body lives in the same place that in the sensation lives of the trauma wound that we would work with. So in EMDR asks, where does this sensation, where are you noticing that shame or guilt in your body? Where do you notice the energy in your body? If you just hold this memory, where's that shift? And every time people would say the same place, they would say their gender affirming self-image and practice. And over time, this energy would be uncovered in the heart, the core of chest. And then when we would say this in meditation, people would say my core, my chest, my heart, my gut. So my shoulders, upper body. So upper body. So if you can go to your rib cage where we have our solar plexus here, where our solar plexus is, up through our heart in the center of our chest, through our shoulders and back. People would identify this essence, because I call it the essence or core self, as it relates to gender and trans experiences, but of human experience. It's in here. Not in our legs, not in our genitals, not in our.
Well, that's
it's in our chest and heart.
I was going to remark on that, because I think people who are not especially sympathetic to trans issues and trans people, they put out there that they believe that it's all focused too much on genitalia.
Yeah,
in
this is
unhealthy ways,
wrong.
And that's what they're using as justification to attack trans kids through all these legislative agendas.
Yeah.
But the reality is that that's not where my transness comes from. That, it really is right in the center.
You can feel it.
Yeah.
It's totally a feeling. And this is where, gender is felt without yet knowing. And that's so important to get. We feel and experience gender in our bodies, not in our brain, not in our genitals, not in our feet, not in my characteristics. Our bodies are walking representations of our essence, of our core, of our mental, emotional, spiritual being. And in saying that, it's super important to, and this is a human experience, is that our hearts hold emotional energy, and our gut and everything that lives within this area of the body is feeling. And that includes our gender identity, and it actually includes our relationship to our sexual identity. And that's that relationship, our sense of self, of my sexual identity. So when I discovered that, it was, and this is something that kind of really fell into my lap. And some people might say, well, yeah, it's obvious, but it's not too obvious when we're talking about gender in today's society, especially related to trans experiences and the issues that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And my theory kind of really unraveled when people were consistently, now 100% of the time, identifying the wounds of their experiences in the same place of where they say where this essence or sense of self lives. For me, that correlation meant that it's not that I'm wrong, or I haven't known myself, or I don't know who I am, or I was only trans because I'm this because this happened to me. No, it's because our experiences, I almost use the analogy, if you can imagine, just like our heart being covered with shame. My heart doesn't go away. Right. My heart's still there. And almost as if you feel entrapped, because many people actually from traumatic experience, but let's just talk about trans experiences and gender, will report feeling a sense of entrapment. I feel like I'm in a cage.
In Shapiro's book, it frequently came up as she went through case studies of people saying, I feel stuck.
I feel stuck.
I'm in this behavior. I'm in this routine. And that, oh my goodness, Stefan, I highlighted that so many times, because that was the exact conversation that I had with my therapist when I was deciding to come out and to transition, was this 100% belief that I didn't have that option. I was stuck in this place where the rules were not mine, and I had no agency. And it wasn't until she kind of helped me see that, why are you thinking that? No, you have agency. You can, and she was a lot kinder than that to me. But that was the sense of it, that I was stuck and I can't get out.
A sense of powerless or lack of control, or sense of choice.
Yeah.
Being stifled. No, 100%. And that, when we talk about themes of trauma, the way I break it down is there's a wounded sense of self. So you can almost imagine a sense of self rooted in shame, guilt, or betrayal is usually the theme. So it's a wounded sense of self. There's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm bad. I'm not doing enough. I'm not enough. Any of those I statements rooted in shame. Then with an entrapped core self, this is where it goes back to that feeling of being trapped, stuck. Like there's a deeper part of me here that is that is quite literally stuck, unreleased, unexpressed. And we can use this literally. We can talk about this in literal, energetic, cellular levels, or we can talk about in symbolic levels of really being trapped, almost like you're a dog in a cage, a bird in a cage that can't give. So a wounded sense of self from an entrapped core self covered in shame, a sense of a lack of a sense of powerlessness and lack of control of the physical body. So many times when it comes to talking about themes of trauma, there is this sense of I cannot control myself. I lack control of myself, or fear of losing control of myself. And there's a huge theme of being controlled thus by others in the external world. Those two things go together. I lack control of myself. External things control me. So this is where we can see addiction, things like this, where we're latching on to external. Fawning, I say fawning as codependency, when we latch onto relationships to fulfill those things. So anything external. And then the fourth layer, so I'll repeat it again, wounded sense of self, an entrapped core self coded in shame, sense of powerlessness or lack of control of myself, my body, and of my life. Okay, with a hyper focus on, and this, the layers of this, which is probably beyond today, we can't get into, but it's typically rooted in a history of conditional dynamics. And this is important for the trans experience in gender. And I say conditional dynamics, I'm talking about my self-worth has been based on my appearance or my performance. Okay. And then when we get there, we have to look at how significant gender, and this is where society, I think we still haven't acknowledged, is the significance of gender as a society on someone's, number one, who I am, what do I believe in, what do I stand for, and what I want to do. And when what I want to do, our creativity, so I'm going to talk about here appearance, performance when it comes to gender. Think about, and anybody listening, let's just take a moment to just consider how your interest or the possibilities of what you could do was impacted by your perceived gender identity from birth. And literally, quite literally, every, I think, activity we could think is gendered in this society. And let's just focus on the United States of America. How gendered things are based on what is expected of you to look like. So when I talk about appearance, that can be look, expression, you name anything that you're perceived, literally, that's what I mean by appearance. Think about gender in that. And then performance is huge, especially when we talk about sport activities with kids. When we talk about kids and creativity, especially at young ages, where you're getting kind of forced in or funneled into certain gendered activities, but also within the home. And this is where parent-child relationships are directly gender, and this is something that we, us as a society, greatly minimize. Child-parent relationships are significantly influenced by perceived gender from birth. Sure. What's the first question people ask when someone's pregnant?
Boy or girl?
Is it a boy or girl?
Yeah, blue or pink?
Before someone's even born, this stuff starts. So I'm talking about day one. I'm not talking about I'm talking about every single layer of your life, and your relationships are impacted by someone's perceived gender identity. So when it comes to powerlessness and a lack of control, I'm talking about those kinds of things of feeling a core part of me is repressed or feel entrapped because I'm responding to my external world. What do I need to do to fit in?
Right.
What do I need to look like to fit in? What do I believe in? How do I want to relate to my external environment? For trans people, this can be where, especially when it comes to adolescence, and then you add sexuality into this. What is my sexuality?
Right.
What am I supposed to? Who am I supposed to be attracted to? What do I like? Who am I attracted to compared to what I'm supposed to be, or who I'm supposed to be? So adding all those layers, I call it going back to the fawning. I'm gonna draw this back in. And this is a defense and protective strategy. We all have defense and protective strategies to keep us safe. And so I believe this essence or core part of ourselves is protected in the face of fear or threat. So if someone does, and this is a human experience, if we don't have the capacity to be safe or act, if we don't have the ability to act that is in alignment with our core self or who we are, we will then protect that. Our brains and bodies will go through a lot of things. Think about repression or suppression, when you just you can feel it, but you don't know it. Those are two different things. And throughout my life, and the reason I really identified this, going back to that upbringing of how appearance and performance in our external worlds, a sense of belonging. If I can't see myself, I can't be. I really felt for myself in my life, even though I didn't have consciousness of it. that I could feel that the sense of like entrapment. Like there was a deeper part of me that just I could just feel this extreme disconnect between my external world and also myself and my body that I couldn't quite put language. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know.
A disconnect. I like that. I know what that feels like. Yeah.
Okay. Just not seeing, and I didn't have any representation of a trans person in my entire life. I don't remember the word trans my entire life because I grew up in the rural South. And, but for so long, I thought it was me, and I thought that, and this goes back to the layers of health and healing, is that my body knew. I had so many physical and medical issues that were undiagnosed and mental, emotional growing up. And this is another thing. I didn't have access to mental health care growing up. Part of it's the age I was living in. I mean, I think in 20 years, 30 years, things have dramatically changed. However, where I grew up, that just wasn't an option. So just having all my environment, what it means to be a girl, a woman's basketball player. I was a woman's basketball player. And my body, I would get made fun of and bullied for being very masculine. I thought I was supposed to be straight. I grew up in a very strict Christian environment, in the South, and which is a curse and a blessing. I've been able to tap into my spirit because I do have a divinity background, believe it or not. All to say, though, and I'm going to finish with the 4 points. I know I'm getting tangential, but there's a lot of layers to this. Yeah. To my discovery, and that's just being able to personally identify with having to conform, but my self-worth and who I was based on what did I look like and how did I perform. And that went back into my own kind of upbringing and the intricacies of my family and sort of my own trauma and sort of emotional mental abuse that I experienced growing up. But it was extremely confusing as a trans person. I mean, obviously, I didn't know I was trans at the time, but to me, I was supposed to, this goes back to the conditions of my environment, be a straight woman, that straight woman, get married, have kids, whatever. I didn't even think about my future.
Well, those expectations are not made subtle in this culture, right?
And we all feel that, whether you're trans, we all feel that. And it created a sense of quite literally disembodiment, and that's what I kind of reframe the trans experience as disembodiment trauma. This is my own terminology that I've come up with, by the way. Sort of reframing of gender dysphoria is disembodiment trauma, and it really creates this. I felt like for a long time it was me, and even when I came out as trans, it took me so long to accept myself because of what I'd been through. And this is the trauma, the trans experience that I talk about. It's not just conscious. You don't have to know you're trans or what you were when you were 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 to experience the layers of what I'm talking about. This can be from a conscious state or an unconscious state of being, because I wasn't conscious of something so core about me for my whole life. And a lot of my work has been trying to unravel that. Like, how could that be? How could I not know something so core about me for so long? Have language for it, consciousness awareness. How come I couldn't embody or come out or be myself? And so that's really the understanding of it. And going back to my kind of this fourth pattern of trauma, which I consider impending doom, which is essentially, and I consider it an existential crisis. But basically what it is, that feeling where it's like, I can never be happy. I'll never be happy. When's the shoe going to drop again? Even when and this goes back to trauma, even when we feel good, there's always that part of me that fears that something bad's going to come. Sure. Like, when's it coming?
My experience, at most, happy was a moment. Happy was not something that I got to have. Because
it's almost like this understanding that, well, there's a part of someone, this is what I got, that it feels I'm unworthy of being stable. There's something about me that I'm not worth. Everybody else is, but I'm not.
Right. That
kind of, which we could argue in so many ways isn't true. However, that's how it feels. Or it's this never-ending, perpetual misery. That impending doom is really enforced by, let's just use the example of religious beliefs. When it comes to fate and destiny, many people will internalize that I'm actually supposed to be a woman, therefore I made a mistake, or I am a mistake. God made a mistake, or I am a sinner.
Right.
Whatever language you want to put it into, whatever religion. We could kind of frame this in so many ways and give examples. But that's just one of my own examples that I struggled with, and that I've noticed themes, and of course the clients that I've worked with over the years, or the course of my career, is that and we can even talk about sexuality here, so not
Sure.
just trans experiences, but queer
Yeah.
experiences, that I'm doing something wrong, I am wrong, I am a sinner, I did something bad, I'm going to hell, whatever. But that is ingrained, that lives in our bodies. And for me, I felt for a long time my own impending doom of, I can't be happy, or I'm unworthy of being happy in who I am, because of all of those years of just pushing to be this straight woman that I just wasn't,
This flawless representation of what they wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To society, not for
Right.
myself. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. If you're, whatever you're comfortable with, tell me a little bit about your journey in terms of that. How old were you when you first became aware of this disembodiment trauma? How did you go about trying to resolve that for yourself?
That's a great question. Well, it's come with it's come kind of really with my work with people. And I always say, trans forward is me right now, but it's really the work that I've done with people, the tens of thousands of hours over the course of my career, really getting to know people and what are the core themes and what I'm talking about here. But in my practice and my work, I have the blessing, and I'm so grateful to be able to also really, it has helped me learn about myself and understand myself. That is an interconnection, especially as a therapist. I think it's so important. We can't be in the room with people if we don't know ourselves, because we have to create that separation, that boundary.
Right.
And that's where the disembodiment trauma, I just say that because that's where my terminology and what I created. However, through my process, I think with so much fixation on the physical world and the physical externalities of gender being biological sex or genitals and physical sex characteristics, there's such a hyperfixation on the trans body and the body being the model or as a valid marker of who you say you are. And that is something that I really actually had to experience for myself to realize, well, that's just not true, through pain and through suffering. But I mean, I'm a firm believer that our life lessons, they're learning lessons for us, and to be grateful for them, because they teach us things about ourselves and the world, and they make us a greater, when we're able to release, forgive, and show gratitude, we're able to really be in the present moment and see our full potential. So for me, and I'm going to answer your question, the surgeries that I've had have been very traumatic for me for various reasons, but I'm in a place in my life now where I can have gratitude for them. I kind of use this, example, this story is just like it's literal, but it's also symbolic. I talk about symbolic imagery and representation all the time. It's very important because, I was walking the other night, and I kind of thought about one of my surgeries. So I had a hysterectomy years ago, and it was all part of my process. And it was actually, I almost lost my life, my physical life on this earth. And because it was an emergency surgery, I had to go in. And I think, looking back, there's so many things to this. Of course, I was the first trans person this person had operated on. And, trans bodies are not necessarily the same as, like, in this case, right, a woman's body. My body wasn't exactly the same as perhaps another woman's body. And that's just other layers, but that's not really, I don't want to get into that, because there's factors that led up to this. Part of it being my own mental, emotional health. I think back then, in the beginning of my transition, like I was saying earlier, I was so fixated on the external meanings of what it means to be a man. Trans,
Sure.
So much focus on the physical body or changing it to be who you say you are. And I think and that doesn't mean that this doesn't take away who I know and feel myself to be, but these surgeries for me at the time, I think there's just layers where it could have been a little better, not to mention the healthcare and fighting for it. There's a lot of stress to it.
Yeah.
However, I was in the hospital that night, and it had to be an emergency surgery because I had so much blood in my system. And I went under that night, and before I went under, I didn't know if I was gonna live or die. I didn't know. And I remember going under that night, and I just, and I hadn't prayed in a long time. I think, in the early stages of my transition, I really lost my faith, because I'm a very faithful person. I almost went to divinity school, actually, instead of social work school. It's a fun fact. And despite being so damaged by the church, the religious institution, I've always maintained faith in a higher something. There's something beyond what I can see in God, and that's just been, thank goodness, a part of me. It goes back to my core self and essence, that spiritual just knowing. And I hadn't prayed in a while because I felt really disconnected from. I felt betrayed. I didn't know how to conceptualize my faith or God at this point because I had been so hurt. But I did pray that night, and before I went under, I just said, God, just take my body. And just in the sense, surrender. Whatever's meant to be, so be it. I didn't know what was going to happen, but so be it. And I did wake up that night, the next day, and this is I want to go back to the present moment. I'm going to mention my mom here, but I love my mom. She's taken some time, of course, and this is probably a whole nother podcast to really, for her to understand me and what it really means to be trans, or to let go of a daughter, or mourning a daughter, so to speak, in her language.
Right.
But my mom wasn't able to be at that surgery that night, so I listened to this meditation, and the meditation, it says, if there's people, which is an act of forgiveness, if there's people that weren't there for you that night or that day, just know they weren't supposed to be there for you, in the sense of, like, what happened for its own reason. Like, okay. You're stronger for it, just how to let go. I always think about my mom because she wasn't there, but I think about that night, and I had this image, I just realized this recently. This goes back to imagery. I had this image, and I just noticed, I was like, wow, I just feel like when I think about that image, I almost think about me with long hair going underneath. Mind you, I didn't have long hair at this time. I had been on hormones, and I, was perceived as, as Stefan. At the time, actually, I was going by another name. But I have this image of, like, and my name was Katie. I try to encourage people, and this is just from my own journey, and this goes back to language, that no matter how I've been perceived and treated, I've always been who I am. There's parts of me that are true to me. Go back to, you love to read. Maybe you've loved to read your whole life. I mean, I'm a very athletic person. I'm still an athlete. I was perceived as a female athlete at the time, but I am still an athlete. That's still true to me. But anyways, Katie, I had this image, though, of me going underneath as, I was perceived as Katie, or as a girl at that time. And it took me a minute when I had that imagery of, like, so interesting, because that's not how it looked at the time. It's not how I felt. But I realized in that moment, I feel like, and this is where symbolically that surgery, like losing my life almost physically and literally. And I'm just going to segue just to give how this points together. I'm into readings. I saw a medium almost about a year ago. My mom went to the same medium, and this person didn't know if it's trans, of course, or anything like that. But when my mom went to the medium, I hope this is okay, Mom, that I'm sharing if she does listen to this, but the medium brought up that, you have 3 daughters, and my mom was like, well, I don't know but my son's trans, and she was, yeah, I'm getting an S and a K. And she said, did he almost lose his life? He almost died? And my mom was like, because my mom, she thought about the surgery, because the surgery was probably the one time where I did, lose my life. And the psychic said, and the medium was like, well, a lot of prayers were sent down for him that night. And his soul had a choice, to pass through. And I don't know the terminology. All the mediums can fill me in here, but there's a terminology or an idea of, like, near-death experiences where your soul chooses to pass through, or you're going to stay. And when I heard this, I really immediately thought about the surgery, and I got really emotional, because for me it felt like, and this goes back to the symbolic meaning of this surgery, the surgery and the process, the pain that I went through was such a painful process, physically, mentally, and emotionally, because after that surgery, that hysterectomy, I went on to have, other surgeries and bottom surgery, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever been through. But that I didn't have a choice no other choice but to accept myself and my life as a trans person beyond what I'm supposed to look like, even as a trans person, just really accept, like, this is who I am. It almost felt like a rebirth from those surgeries, and this is where I say, like, the surgeries gave me, of course, a different type of physical comfort and the way I perceived seeing myself in the world, being able to embody me and my essence. However, so much more of it came from, I really, really had to accept myself, because there was no other way. I had to live my life, going back to the symbolic meaning. Like, I died, I think, in mental, emotional way, I had to really let go, of everything I was holding on to, my past.
So this crisis point of the hysterectomy day, that, yeah, a symbolic death, or at the very least a pivot point, from which you realize, okay, so I'm pivoting. Which direction am I going in now?
Yes, am I going to lean into this idea that there's something wrong with me, or chase these impossible desires or dreams of myself? I'm not going to be I'm not a man like the other men. I'm not. I'm a trans man, and there's something unique and special about that, and that is okay. That's not a curse. That is a blessing. That is a gift. That's a joy, and that's been really my mission, just since that time in my life, to really push through that physical, just having the pain. And I was like, there's nothing that this physical, or, that healthcare can give. I have to find this within my heart. I have to be able to accept and trust that I am exactly who I'm supposed to be. God doesn't make mistakes. No one's a mistake. There's nothing wrong with my body. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm a man. And I'm trans. It doesn't take. I'm not like other men. I don't have, of societal standards of what it means to be a man based on biological sex.
Right.
But there is something about me since the day I was born. It wasn't like these surgeries. And this goes back to this. It's not like the surgery made me. It's not like these surgeries or even testosterone has made me who I've always been there. My essence has been me. And my life experiences have come with I didn't have language to understand myself. I didn't see myself. I didn't see other trans men growing up. And I didn't even see models. My grandfather and my uncle are models of masculinity that I feel that I can embody, that feel true to me. But I didn't have that. And then on top of, trauma, sexual abuse, growing up in the rural South, a strict religious environment, you name all these external things. Right. I am the same person, and that is me. That is a part of my life. That is who I am, and I had to let go of shame about how I've been perceived or treated in my life to make it mean anything about me. Just because I was perceived as Katie, for example, a girl in a lot of my life. So what? And that can be okay. That wasn't my truth. I didn't feel embodied. I wasn't healthy. There was a lot of healing that had to be done. But it's been able to shape who I am today, and that is like the power of being able to accept that I wouldn't know anything of what it means of the wisdom that has come with my experience to be able to really understand, interpret not only myself but others in the world, especially as it relates to gender, has come through my transition. And I think for so long I was trying to hold on to something that just, like I said earlier, wasn't my truth. It wasn't possible for me, seeking this type of masculinity or being a man, or I'm not supposed to. It's kind of letting go of that shame of being trans itself. It wasn't like there was something wrong that me to happen, or because of my abuse, or that I'm crazy, or I'm a predator. There's all these things that going back to your about disembodiment, I had to really. I noticed when after my surgeries or physical, say all the medical stuff was done, there's nothing more I could do. I found too, leading up to, where I landed with disembodiment trauma, and I found this with people I work with too, sometimes the psycho-emotional transition is by far the most challenging and the most distressing process. It's not the physical pain going through the surgery, of course, but being able to, hey, I'm here now, this is who I am. People are starting to, for the most part, see me as Stefan, but I have the same heart and the same brain. That hasn't gone away. My heart and brain hold all of my experiences that I've went through. Talking about belief patterns and negative beliefs of myself, or the trauma had gone. That didn't just go away with the transition. That didn't just like blink of an eye. Go, yeah, I know who I am. I feel how. But here came all of this stuff. Like I felt like it was like a wave of stuff just compiling on me from my past. Remember I told you the body and the brain protects you until you have the ability to do something about it or make sense of it.
Yeah, okay.
All this stuff came up, but I was able to hold space from it from a new way to be able to, okay, what was I going through? That there's so many answers. Okay, I was trans. What did that mean to me? How did that really, wow, that makes sense why I was bullied and why that hurt so bad in that way, or my dad treating me like this, or being a basketball player and not feeling that, or feeling stuck, or feeling powerless, or feeling shame, or not safe, or da-da-da. I can continue to open up space for that stuff that came piling on after or during, you know, throughout my medical training, after that psycho-emotional, being able to really develop a whole sense of self in my life. And this is just for any human trans experience, but it gets really complicated with trans experiences. People could think about, I feel like I've held like 6 or 7, 8, 9 identities, and I feel like I've lived 9 lives in certain ways, just on how I've been perceived. Right. And when it goes back to the name I've been called, have people consider me a boy or girl, or in the neutral state, or neither, or whatever it is. Those are identities, because who we are as people, we cannot possibly separate the physical. We can't separate how people perceive us from who we are. It's that interplay connection throughout our entire life.
Well, one of the misrepresentations that gets put on us as trans people is that we look to bottom surgery as a way to solve some other problem, that we are misguided in looking to, you know, in my case, the fact that once I have a vagina, everything's going to be fine. And that's a ridiculous notion. And it's, you know, just so self-evidently false. But everything you just described, Stefan, is evidence to the contrary of what they're saying. You know, that there was this core you, and at times it was covered by shame, by other experiences, and that anything you've done medically is not looking outside for some other solution. It's okay, how can I make my physicality align with that essence, that soul, that in the case of when you were walking me through that exercise earlier, that light. Where is that light? Where is that energy coming from? And I want to ask you about this, but first let's talk about me. What you were having me envision, I was seeing the light right there at that point where you would give CPR to somebody, right at the V in the sternum. The anxiety that I felt when I was closeted was, what would you say that is? 2 inches, 3 inches north of that. It always started here, radiated here. Listeners can't see this, but I'm grabbing the spot on my chest where it was, and I would do that when I was having anxiety attacks, because it would start here,
same place in the body.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of inches north, and it would just radiate from there, the same way that if I sit and do those sorts of exercises, I can feel the better energy radiating from just 3 or 4 inches south. Wow. But it physically took over my entire body. My shoulders would go up towards my ears. My jaw would clench. And so for me, it's a very subtle difference in where the centering is.
100%.
Did you find anything like that in terms of where in your journey?
Yeah. No. You make such a great point, because it talk about, you know, right here we talk about our solar plexus and our self-esteem, and how we're perceived, or how the me in the world, let's say. Me in the world, and my inability to accept that kind of that betrayal, that shame, that, like you're saying, that radiate, that your heart was quite literally hurting physically, sensually, mentally, and then how that connects to then our nervous systems. Okay, heart, brain, interconnection. I mean, in our society, there's a hyperfixation on the mental. We even call it mental health. We don't call it emotional health.
Right.
Mental health, or brain body disconnect. There's so many frameworks that instill that. There's something, your brain chemistry's off. There's something in your brain you don't know. This versus we've completely neglected the heart. There's that heart, and this goes back to the core interconnection. You not being, like you said, that anxiety. Your nervous system was quite literally reacting within that shit. Something wrong with me. I can't come out. And everything that you were going through in that time, from head all the way down, your nervous system runs through, and we call it the vagal nerve, from the top of your head all the way down through your gut to the base of your spine. And the vagal nerve, we do a lot of exercises to calm that. But yes, in the sense of being able to, because when I was growing up, I had so much hormonal issues. Baseline was anxiety, just nervous system up on it all the time, alert, for many different reasons. And that sense of my heart hurting, my heart hurt, being disconnected from this different layer, the layers and depths of my heart space, which when we talk about core self, and the essence of us. So yes, no, I love that you say that, because there's that separation of, okay, this is who I am in the world, and then what is my heart saying, and how do I want these two to align? How do I want that to radiate through and be in the world? It's almost like a light, of being able to really say, hey, this is me, and not letting the energy of the external impact that bubble, that external, but that is quite radiating through your heart, through your brain, up your body, down. I wanted to add to what you were saying about, this energy in your heart space, because you said that conflation, I used to call it a conflation of your sense of self being bad or wrong. I mean, you name it, fill in the blank, versus authentic, genuine, who you are. I mean, that same place in the body is living. It prevents your ability to have a conscious sense of self or understanding that is at peace and at ease. I'm talking about mind, body, spirit connection. When we are disembodied, there's a disruption between my sense of self, what my body, my physical body, what lives in here, and then others, that disruption of energy flow. And that is
now see that I think a layman's understanding of what disembodied means carries other connotations. So I think what you just said perfectly explains what you're getting at, that's the level of disembodiment that we're talking about.
Because you said even earlier in the presentation that it went up through your brain. Now it's like that interconnect, that felt feeling, seeing, feeling, being, you name it, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, that connection and flow of energy. Because it is energy, it's energy. And energy doesn't lie. I mean, there's a reason we could feel, you felt that sense of entrapment for your whole, and that inability to be expressed, be embodied, be mental, emotional, physical, socially, that incongruency, so to speak. It's a congruent feeling. It's an alignment feeling. When people say, I feel aligned now. And when we go back to, I had a kind of this thought about the rebirth of myself, or just in the sense of the medical transition and social emotional. It's not the physical or the medical that comes first, because there's this hyperfection of, once you do the conditions of your physical body and your medical experiences, then thus make you who you say you are. It's not that, it's the reverse. Our essence and our emotional, mental, spiritual beings, our physical bodies are a reflection of that evolution, not the other way around. And so in the sense of, as I evolve internally, that will then show in my body physically and externally. In terms of health, in terms of healing, and in terms of how I'm perceived, and in terms of my resonance with, or my congruency with, the physical and external world. And I'm not talking, there might be time where I'm not seen, not gender correct, but that doesn't take away me. I can hold that separation.
You're centered.
I'm centered. I'm here. I'm whole. But I think that's so critical when we look at those distinctions, because that ties into kind of, or just to go back to policies and practices and structures right now in language in terms of gender and trans experiences, is that there is this hyper fixation when it comes to gender dysphoria with the adaptation of the physical body, or that you need to qualify, you need to have dysphoria, this distress in your sex characteristics, your genitalia, or you're misaligned to who you say you are. So you need this to then be who you are. And this comes where gender dysphoria is a hugely problematic. And I talk about how it actually reinforces disembodiment, because there's this idea that there's something wrong with my body that I must then change to then be who I am. And we can see how in so many ways, of course, the physical and your mental, emotional world align. There's a constant alignment or misalignment, some people. But of course that contribute hormones and how that makes us feel. And when we talk about hormone regulation, it's extremely intricately connected on a cellular and energetic level to our sense of self and hormone regulation, nervous system. We talk about anxiety, depression, health, and just overall health and just feeling good. Of course that's there. But when gender dysphoria in so many ways says that your body, there's something wrong with you, your body, or you're not who you are until you meet these qualifications. So many people don't meet these criteria for gender dysphoria to receive treatment or health care, medical care. But I think it's just so critical, because the language we use shapes the social group or group mindset in our society.
And the evolution of the language in the DSM has been toward that. That where now my understanding is that the focus is on the distress that we feel rather than that gender diversity, variety in gender is not the problem. It's the distress that is caused by living in an intolerant society. And, as you were describing things, we had been talking about it in terms of light and heat. But as what you were describing struck me as being musical, that there's a resonating thing in the core, but it's discordant with everything around it. And what you want is for those things to sound together, to be consonant,
Love that analogy, yes.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to sit with that for a while, because I tend to think about things like that in terms of light and heat. But I think music is probably a really good allegory as well.
And wavelength, you're talking about energy.
Yeah, right.
Energy, cause, effect, that energetic energy flow. Exchange, exactly. From a musical, I love that analogy too, because you're so right. Just the sound wavelengths, sounds, vibrations. It's critical to understand these things, because it's not one thing. We're not people in a vacuum. It's not just about my physical body and that's all of who I am or how the world. That's scratching the surface. Yeah. There's the energy world that we're living in now. You can feel it, and if anybody's seen or been with people who have really stepped into themselves or embodied themselves, when we're talking about transitioning or trans experience, you're getting a different level of energy from that individual. You can't even describe it. And if you can't describe it, that means you're feeling the right thing, because you can't put words to it.
Right.
It's an aliveness. It's a meeting that person, like seeing someone for the first time. It's about if we take up the curtain and seeing the light, it's like this dark, and then you just, wow. And you can, I've just had the blessing to be able to see so many people and be with people through their journeys, through the years, starting from really day one, then their journeys of coming out or being or discover, to 2, 3, 4. Some people I've worked with 5 years later. I almost take a step back from, I'm like, wow, like this is so powerful to just telling of the human experience, and just how hard, and I think because trans people aren't different. I try, and when it talks about the embodiment of gender, to include every single person on this planet, but I just think the trans experience for us highlights, and instead of bashing or ostracizing or objectifying trans people, we need to start listening to trans people, especially when it comes to things like gender and sexuality. Like, hey, we're here, like the fight to be who you are and not have any language, no recognition, absolutely no resource, and yet here you are today. If that's not telling of the essence of who you are, I don't know.
There we go. Yeah, and you and I are sitting here putting words to that, right?
Exactly.
Words and images and expressions. On the drive over, I was listening to a news story about a group of trans youth and their parents who protested at the Florida state, I forget if it was the state capitol or the legislature, but in terms of standing up against this unfair legislation. And that, what you're just saying was what struck me, is that at that age, I did not have the vocabulary, the concepts, the context in any way to stand up in a healthy way like that and say, no, I'm sorry, but what you're saying is wrong. Here's the truth. Please listen to me. And that's that please listen to me part is
so powerful.
So powerful, and it's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. So thank you for sharing some of your story and for you telling me about your practice. Jan Morris was a distinguished author in Britain, had scaled Mount Everest, served 4 years in the English Army, was a husband and a father of 5, when she came out as trans and pursued gender-affirming surgery. Her 1974 book, Conundrum, chronicles her journey. And after my conversation with Stefan, I thought about this passage from Conundrum. As I grew older, my conflict became more explicit to me, and I began to feel that I was living a falsehood. I was in a masquerade. My female reality, which I had no words to define, clothed in a male pretense. Psychiatrists have often asked me if this gave me a sense of guilt, but the opposite was true. I felt that in wishing so fervently, so ceaselessly, to be translated into a girl's body, I was aiming only at a more divine condition, an inner reconciliation. Coming up in March, we have a wonderfully fun and informative conversation with Elliot Schrafer, author of Queer Ducks and Other Animals. We also have insights into drag king culture and the many uses of trans tape with Win Tran. I'm Claire McCarthy, and this has been Transqat. Thanks for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. Just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.